Rapporteur, I think we can start.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 9th session of the Forus Virtual Forum on Enabling Environment for a Thriving Civil Society, What Role for Forus? Simultaneous interpretation of this meeting is available in English, French, and Spanish in the Interpretation tab represented by a globe at the right bottom of your screen. If you wish to intervene during this meeting, you can raise your hand to speak or write in the Q&A box. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à la 9e session du Forum virtuel de Forus. Une interprétation simultanée de cette session est disponible en anglais, français et espagnol dans l'onglet Interprétation, représenté par un globe en bas et à droite de votre écran. Si vous souhaitez intervenir pendant la réunion, vous pouvez lever la main pour parler ou écrire dans la boîte de questions et réponses. Bienvenidos a todos y a todas a nuestra novena sesión del Foro Virtual de Forus. Si desea acceder a la interpretación simultánea, lo puede hacer y está disponible en español, inglés y francés. Puede hacer esto seleccionando la opción Español en la pestaña Interpretación que encontrará en la parte baja de su pantalla a la derecha representada por un globo. Si desea hablar o intervenir durante la reunión, puede levantar la mano para hablar o puede dejar sus comentarios y preguntas en la caja de preguntas y respuestas y de diálogo que sirve para este propósito. We will now like to start with a survey that you will see now on your screen. So we would like to know if you agree or not with the following statement. Membership of a global CSO network can provide additional support and protection for CSOs working on an enabling environment in their countries. Please let us know if you agree or if you disagree with the following statement. We'll give you 1 minute to answer the question.
Can you translate to Spanish and French?
Yara, I think that you need to click on the translation and you will be able to hear the interpretation.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry about this.
We're still waiting for some participants to answer. George, you can let me know when I can show the screens. We have 14 answers so far.
Okay, well, maybe just give it a minute more and see whether we can get a higher response rate. Okay, Arturo, how are we doing?
We have 15.
Okay, well, maybe we'll just accept that for the moment. It is early and we're kind of keen to get into the session. So maybe you'd give us the results.
Can you see the results now?
Yes. It seems everybody's in agreement with the statement, which is good. Okay, thank you. So hello, everybody, and you're very welcome to the call here today to the session. My name is Deirdre de Burke. I think most of you know me. And the title of today's session is Enabling Environment for a Thriving Civil Society, What Role for Forus? So I know this topic is one that most Forus members are very engaged with. And I think this high level of interest by members in the topic was very obvious earlier this year when we commissioned a scoping study into how best Forus could support its members in their future work on enabling environment. And Forus intends to use the findings and the recommendations of this scoping study to develop a strategy on enabling environment for the network going forward. Now, the COVID pandemic just made its presence felt as the study began in February this year, but I'm happy to say that the work proceeded very successfully online with the highly professional work of the consultants involved, but also with the cooperation of all of the members of the Forus network. And we want to recognise and thank you all for that support here today. So the research contract for the scoping study was awarded to a consultancy, as you know, made up of 2 senior members of our Canadian platform, Cooperation Canada. They were Shannon Kindernay and Ana de Oliveira, and their colleague Brian Tomlinson, who works with AidWatch Canada and whose expertise on enabling environment is widely recognised among civil society internationally. So the consultants first reached out to all Forus members by means of an online survey, and approximately 2/3 of Forus's overall membership completed the online survey. So this provided us with information about the work that Forus members have been doing on trying to promote an enabling environment in their national contexts. But it also gave us useful information about the needs of members and about the aspects of their work that they would like Forus to better support them with. The online survey was then followed up by in-depth interviews with selected Forus members in different parts of the world, and 2 in-country dialogues with CSOs, which were convened by 2 of Forus national platforms, by Abong in Brazil and Infid in Indonesia. And these case studies also revealed some interesting insights into the operating environments of civil society in these countries. The consultants also reached out to donors and partners of Forus to interview them about what added value they felt that Forus could bring to the work of its national platforms and its regional coalitions on civic space and enabling environment. And I'm happy to say today, as part of this session, the consultants will be sharing for the first time the key findings of the scoping study with Forus members. The full report will be available to share with you all over the coming weeks, but the purpose of this session today is to share the top level findings with you all and to give you a chance to reflect on them and to provide more detailed inputs on certain topics when we move into smaller breakout groups later in the call. And before I go to our first speaker, Forus would like to acknowledge the support, both practical and financial, that was provided by our donor Bread for the World to enable the scoping study to be carried out. Unfortunately, Christine Meisler from Bread for the World was to be one of our speakers in today's session, but she is unwell today and cannot join us. However, we wish her a speedy recovery. So now back to our first speaker today. I'd like to call on Ana de Oliveira from the Cooperation Canada, who was one of the consultants carrying out the study, to present the key findings of the study to all of us present. I would like to remind her also, and other speakers who follow, to speak slowly so that the interpreters can follow. Anna, you have 20 minutes for your presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Deidre, and thanks Forus and all the Forus members in this call for all the contributions that you gave to this study. I also like to thank my colleagues Shannon and Brian, who worked very closely to me to produce this study. And so I am going to present a bit about the research process and then focus on some of the key studies findings, as Deidre mentioned, some of the areas that platforms could investigate a bit more and invest in. And finally, I'm going to show some of the roles that Forus could play into promoting civic space and the enabling environment. So for the next slide, please, Arnold. Thank you. So the study was divided into 3 spheres. So the first one was on enabling environment and regulatory, enabling legal and regulatory environment. So in this first part, the study focused on laws and regulations, but also the process of de-legitimization of CSOs, and the matter of impunity, redress, and also the digital environment. The second sphere was called Space for Effective and Inclusive Policy Dialogue. And in this one, we focused on policy engagement, but more than that, on an effective policy engagement. And we considered mechanisms available for dialogue, the issue of transparency, of diversity, of power relations. So all these aspects were included in this second sphere. And finally, the third, resources, capacities, and partnerships, focused on the donor enabling environment, on the relation of platforms to allies, and also CSO capacity and the matter of mutual partnerships and solidarity. We also focused on this last part on the perceptions of CSO's legitimacy and including stigmatization of CSOs. Next one, please. So very quickly about the research methodology, this study comprised a literature review that focused on the latest trends and campaigns on civic space and enabling environment. There was an online survey that many of you participated. So we had 44 members completing the survey, being 40 national platforms and 4 regional coalitions. And then we had 27 in-depth interviews with national platforms, regional coalitions, and other partners and allies of Forus. And finally, the 2 country case studies, as Deidre mentioned as well, that Abong and Infid participated. So this was the methodology. So next one, please. All right. So the study confirmed some findings that we already knew from previous studies and actions. So the first one, that civil society continues to face increasing restrictions, and those restrictions affect primarily human rights defenders, environmentalists, women's rights organizations. The second was that institutional mechanisms that are currently in place are insufficient to ensure an enabling environment for civil society, whether in terms of addressing impunity, for example, or facilitating an inclusive policy dialogue. And third, that formal and informal collaboration requires strengthening. And these collaborations would be between coalitions or between NGOs or with social movements, other groups. So the study really confirmed those 3 aspects. And the next one, please. Some new insights that the study brought forth. So the first is that more donors are keen to support CSOs on closing civic space and enabling environment issues. So these donors are more willing to understand those trends and to examine these issues with the CSOs they engage with. The second finding was that there is a call for a shift from capacity development to more nuanced kinds of support. So although coalitions may still need training or developing skills, sometimes what they seek is actually support to deal with difficult situations, or support to access spaces of influence, and to get in touch and build relationships with allies at all levels, local, national, and global. And the third is that there are opportunities for cooperation and peer learning at all those levels. So there is an interest in supporting CSOs in this to access South collaboration and peer learning opportunities. So this was very interesting to see as well. Next one, please. Okay, Arnold is going to talk a bit more about the breakout rooms after this the session, but I just wanted to give you some heads up on the topics. we're going to divide this into 3 groups divided by linguistics. So the first one is going to be on human rights organizations and promoting gender equality. This one is going to be in English. There will be a room in French on CSO stigmatization and positive narratives for CSOs. And the last one in Spanish on digital transformation. So I just give you the topics now so that when I present the other slides, you can pick information or see what resonates with you so we can further discuss in the breakout groups. So next one, please. All right, so from all the contributions that you as members gave to this study and our research analysis, we came up with some key areas for platforms to investigate if they want to have program on civic space and enabling environment. So although we are calling this like recommendations, this is not exactly a list for platforms to follow exactly, but it's more in the sense of seeing where the national and the regional platforms may have comparative advantages. And, but also the platforms should scan the reality of the conditions in their own countries and choose what is more relevant for their cases and what should be prioritized. But these are some key areas that the study showed. There are 8. So the first one is review and address legal and regulatory restrictions. So it would be interesting to build alliances, advocacy strategies, and monitor and understand all the laws and regulations to ensure that they are engaged with the international standards and good practice. The second key area would be to advocate for institutionalized and inclusive policy dialogue. So to strengthen information gathering, policy analysis, dialogue, and advocacy skills, coordinate for policy influence, leverage the existing policy frameworks, and ensure and promote diversity within and without the platforms. Next one, please. All right, there is this on donors, for CSOs to encourage donors to strengthen official and INGO donor partnerships. So these are actions for the platforms to encourage the donors. So to follow the lead of civil society, to improve funding mechanisms, to work with civil society organizations and networks to promote more enabling environment in general. So this work, and also just a quick comment that in the final report, we have like recommendations for donors, recommendations for allies. So here, of course, I'm focusing more on the platforms because of the scope of the presentation, but there are also these insights for other players. And then the second here in this slide, to promote coalition building and challenging closing civic space. So to seek out for formal and informal partnerships at all levels. The next, please. Another area is to address risk and CSO security issues. So for platforms to make this call on donors to invest in CSO measures for legal protection, to consider security, data protection, accounting. So this is something that came up in a very interesting way in the study too. And the other one in this slide is strengthen CSO transparency, accountability, and civil society narrative. So it's important to strengthen local trust, to project positive stories, positive narratives of CSOs to the public eye, and to have contacts with the media at the national and international level to promote those stories. And the next one. Thank you. Support national efforts through international CSO platforms. So the idea of supporting peer learning and facilitating the linkages with regional platforms to give attention to South-South learning experiences and tightening relationships with other organizations in order to create more synergies and to avoid duplication of the work. And finally, to underpin efforts to improve the enabling environment with investments in CSO capacities and resilience. So what I had mentioned earlier, different kinds of support, capacity, and to strengthen resilience in hostile operation environments. So these are the 8 key areas that we wanted to highlight. And then the final slide, please. About the role of Forus and how Forus can build an action plan to promote more enabling environment alongside its members. So one thing that it's very important to stress is the importance of dialogue and partnership with an ecosystem of other established players. So it's crucial to stress this, that there is a lot of work being done around civic space and enabling environment. So it's crucial to work together and develop shared strategies. And that being said, the 4 areas that we are highlighting here is first one, advocacy leadership. So to build on principles such as equality and justice and democracy, to work with the membership to improve mobilization, and Forus could really lead global advocacy efforts on behalf of these members and cooperating with the members and other global allies. Training and resources is the second one. So to enhance CSO skills and their strategies, use the model of train the trainer to share existing resources with the members and make the members share their lessons learned and their knowledge. Which brings exactly to peer learning, the third one. So to improve partnerships in different countries, facilitate the exchange of knowledge, enhance the connections among peers, and create those networks of international solidarity. And finally, the fourth one, fundraising. So to support the members to identify fundraising opportunities, also advocate for funds for CSOs, and mobilize resources accessible to members. So this would be kind of like a roadmap of key areas that Focus could play a role in. So next slide, please. Thank you, merci beaucoup. Muchas gracias y obrigado. Back to you, Dietrich.
Great. Thanks very much, Anna, and for such a concise overview of the key findings of the study. And I know it's very difficult. You've already shared with me the very first rough draft of the findings. There's so much in terms of rich recommendations in the report that I think Forus is going to find very, very helpful. I know it's not possible in a short presentation like this to share all of those, but I think you have given us the top level findings. And as I say, within the next couple of weeks, we will be sharing the draft of the final report with our members, and we look forward to the reactions and their comments. But just following your presentation today and the findings you've shared with us, I'd like to invite anybody on the call, any of our participants, to ask any clarifying questions or make any immediate comments that they would like to make on what they've heard in terms of the findings you presented. So if anybody on the call, any of our participants would like to raise their hand or put a comment in the chat box, anything you'd like to ask Anna to clarify, anything she has said about the key findings, or any quick reaction you want to make to some of the points that she has made. So I'm looking to see whether I can see any raised hands, and maybe my colleagues could also draw my attention to anyone they see who's indicating that they'd like to put a question or a comment to Anna. So at the moment, I don't see any raised hands, and I don't think I see anything in the chat box either. So if that's the case, we can move on. I mean, you'll get an opportunity in the breakout groups, I think, to get into more discussion and to engage with some of the findings. But I'll ask Arno now to explain to you a little bit about how the breakout groups are going to work. And then we'll go back to hearing from some of the platforms that were involved in the case studies that were part of the Enabling Environment Scoping Study. So Arno, over to you to explain about the breakout rooms.
Great, thank you, Deirdre. So we will now give the floor to the panelists for 20 minutes, but just before that, we would like to inform you that once the panelists have finished, the participants will be divided into several breakout rooms in order to discuss certain aspects of the report. The first breakout room will be in French and will discuss the stigmatization of CSOs and the positive story for CSOs. The second breakout room will be in Spanish and will discuss digital transformation. The third breakout room will be in English and will discuss women's rights organizations and promoting gender equality. The participants will be divided into several working groups within 20 minutes. Please let us know now if you would like to be part of an English, French, or Spanish speaking group. If you wish to join the English speaking group, please open the list of participants and put a raised hand in the box. If you wish to join the French speaking group, please open the list of participants and put a green tick in the box. If you would like to join the Spanish speaking group, please open the list of participants and put a red cross. Please keep the symbol displayed during the panel discussion and do not remove it. If you are unable to display one of these symbols, please tell us in the chat box if you wish to join the English, French, or Spanish speaking group. Over to you, Deirdre.
Thanks very much. So just to clarify again, right now, if all of you on the call can go to the participant list, so you can access that at the bottom of your screen, you see all of the participants who are on this call. And if beside your name, you can use one of the three symbols that Arno has mentioned, the green tick, the red, the cross, or the raised hand sign, depending on what group you want to go into. The green tick is for the French group, the red cross is for the Spanish-speaking group, and the raised hand is for the English-speaking group. And they will each be discussing different issues. So while you're doing that, and please, I would ask all of you to go to the participant list and to indicate your preference over the next few minutes, I will start by introducing our panelists. And we have three panelists today who are going to make a short input, about 7 to 8 minutes each. The first of these is Pedro Boca, from Abong, which is our Brazilian platform. And Pedro is going to speak to us just about the experience that Abong had in convening and hosting the in-country dialogue as part of the scoping study on the issue of enabling environment. So Pedro, I'd like to invite you to address the session here and to share some of those experiences with us. Over to you, Pedro.
Hi, Deidre. Hi, everybody. Good morning. We're here in the morning here in Brazil, but good day, good afternoon for all of you. So, yes, we produced a study here in Brazil based on two major moments. One of them was collective reflections that we as Abong and our international working group was a lot of organizations here in Brazil are part of, and also we had a contribution from a debate that we had held online with outside members of ABONG, but who are also in the field of the organizations here to talk about the shrinking of civic spaces and the problem of the environment for CSOs here in Brazil under the government of Jair Bolsonaro, who is our president since 2019. We're now about 2 years of his mandate. And what we discussed there, and also we want to thank beforehand to Anna and everybody from Canada and Forus that help us doing this study, and we did a very good interview with them in the process that helped us clarify a lot of things and speak out about the reality of our country. But what we found out on this study is we were talking about the need of discuss this in Brazil. We are facing since mid-2016 deepening political, social, institutional, and economic crisis, and especially from 2019, from now, the situation became worse with this government who is an open enemy from CSOs, who is attacking directly our organizations, both on legal issues and political issues, participation issues, spaces from participation that were taken out from the Brazilian organizations. It's been really confused, and we are really under attack here in our country. And we know that this is a condition that countries all over the world are facing in the moment that we're living in. But another thing that was important to address in the report, and I want to finish with this because it's only a 5-minute contribution here, but was the impact of the COVID pandemic and the organizations and in this environment of action. Not only we are facing the problems with our government and with the institutions here in Brazil, but also with the pandemic, we are facing a big crisis of the organizations, a crisis who affect us in financing the organizations, but also in how these organizations can act in our country with their grassroots communities, with the regions they're active. So it's important to say that here in Brazil, we did a survey about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the third sector, on the CSOs, and we had terrible results. Actually, we are facing a situation where 67% of our civil society organizations had a drop in the revenue collection above 50% after the start of the pandemic, and we have a very tough number of 83% of these organizations who foresee concrete risks of closing the doors and shutting off their actions after the pandemic because of the reduction of activities and funding. So these situations, the combination of these two situations, the government who attacks the CSOs and a deeply pandemic crisis, are bringing for Brazilian organizations a new scenario, which is not a good one, but is a challenging one. And it's very important for us to be part of these international studies and international moments to share with you our reality, but also to learn from you how we can proceed on situations like this, to learn from your experiences and everything. So I really salute a study like this one that was made, and we hope that we can not only here on this panel, but in all the forest community throughout this process, to learn how to improve our actions here and how we can also facilitate to contribute other countries and other organizations who are facing similar problems. Thank you, Deidre.
Very much, Pedro. It's really interesting to hear. So what you're talking, first of all, about the challenges that civil society in Brazil faced in terms of a very hostile government that seemed to be actively undermining its work. But then the impacts of the COVID pandemic also further exacerbating those challenges, and also raising issues about financing, future financing, and really putting the future, the continuation of the work of some of those CSOs very much in question. So it is a very serious situation, and it sounds to me like the report that you did, the study into the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on the third sector, was a very timely one. And I definitely would like to share that with all of the other Forus members. So we can do that. But just to say that we will continue to work with the BONG, because we recognise you face a particularly difficult set of circumstances, and Forus's intention is to be a support to all of its members, but particularly those who are in such challenging circumstances as those that a BONG faces. So thanks for sharing that with us, Pedro. And I'll now ask Tatas Sukarska from our Indonesian platform, INFID, to share INFID's experience of convening and hosting a similar discussion with civil society in Indonesia as part of this scoping study. So Tatat, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Deirdre, and good evening and good afternoon from Indonesia. So yeah, we are also very thankful to be involved in this research, because it gives us opportunity to gather our fellow members, especially during the pandemic, because since the pandemic and also before, the forum to discuss our own well-being, to be said, so the CSO well-being and also the sustainability and so on is very much limited in Indonesia. So this forum actually give INFID the chance to gather some of our members and also fellow networks to talk about the shrinking civic space and the condition and challenges that we faced in Indonesia. So yeah, the discussions in Indonesia involved 20 participants representing various sectors, including environment, anti-corruption, human rights, legal aid, women's rights organization, indigenous peoples, and community empowerment organizations. And those organizations are also representing geographical perspective, because Indonesia is an archipelagic country. So there are many small islands and also big islands. So these 20 organizations coming from Papua, Maluku, Sulawesi, and other Indonesian islands other than the main island Java. So in the discussions, we realized that our challenges in Indonesia is also not different from other CSOs in other parts of the world. For example, we have challenges at both national and subnational levels caused by regulations and trends in the current political conditions. So the current government is, let's say, there's a sign of growing authoritarian spirit in the current government. Even though in 2014, almost all CSOs in Indonesia, so yeah, almost all of the CSOs were supported this government. But when now in the second term, starting from 2019, the authoritarian character is kind of coming up and growing. And then also another sign of this restriction or shrinking civic space for CSOs is that now the government increased its effort in monitoring CSOs that receive funds from foreign institutions. This is, we felt it very much, especially for the national NGOs, which work a lot with foreign donors or foreign philanthropic organizations. And then other challenges faced by CSOs, they are very contextual also at the local level. For example, for CSOs working in small islands or remote areas, they are finding difficulties for funding or sustainability organizations to maintain its sustainability. And also they also have the problem how to reach the CSOs, the community, the people on the ground, because the lack of infrastructure, access to the remote areas and so on. And then also we found that the meaning of participation, which is very much in some part, the participation, citizens' participation, including CSOs' participation, is increasing after the fall of the 1998 authoritarian regime. But still, the participation meaning is it's very much technical, only to fulfill the requirements for group representation. For example, some laws required people's participation or citizens' participations. For example, the village law required people's participation, and other laws also is already open for public. For example, we already have the public information disclosure and so on. And there's also the presidential decree, which indicate that CSOs can participate as self-managed implementer for public procurement, which means also actually this presidential decree gives opportunity for CSOs to involve or to get some funding to be involved in the government procurement projects, for example. But currently there are so many laws also contradicts with those good laws, for those enabler laws in Indonesia. And then other than that, the strengthening intolerance and conservatism affects also the participation of citizens and civil society in voicing various issues, especially who works for gender issues, for example. We are very much threatening by the regional fundamentalism, the discriminatory and the increasing discriminatory policies against women. And then also sorry, it's already 5 minutes. I have to quick. Even though, despite all those of the challenges, some of the CSOs that were discussed in the forum also already applied some of the strategies. For example, where there's a need for civil society movement to return to the grassroots to strengthen communities also, because some are very much involved in the advocacy with the government and not really much working with the grassroots community. And also some also already build the cooperation with local government and also do the self-fundraising because there are growing challenge for the funding and so on. Then also there's a strategy to regenerate human resources and diversify sources of funding, for example, not to only depend on foreign funding and so on. And also CS also already realized the need to increase their capacity to develop cybersecurity for campaigns and advocacy. This is very much this concern very much growing in during the pandemic, because many CSOs facing digital threats during the pandemic, especially those who are very critical to the government on the policy to handle the COVID-19 situations in Indonesia. And the last strategy is that there's a need to strengthen coalitions and collaborate at local, national, regional, and global levels. As I already mentioned also that the organization that we talked during the studies data collection for the study said that it's very it was very long time since we have this kind of discussions to talk about our sustainability, our well-being, civic space enabling environment, and INVID managed to gather organizations not only who always work with INVID, but also the other one which usually characterized as radical or quite hard in their movement and so on. So we really managed to invite various type of organizations, and those various types of organizations are agreed that we need more forum to strengthen the enabling environment of CSOs in Indonesia to support the democracy and also our work in Indonesia. So maybe that's what can I say for now. Thank you.
Great, Tatat, and thank you very much. I'm really struck when listening to you about the diversity of the CSOs that were represented in the dialogue that you convened as INVID, but also the range of issues that were raised. And it seems to me that perhaps going forward, there is a role for national platforms in convening these kind of forums and discussions on the issue of civic space and enabling environment, because it's clear there's an appetite and a need from civil society at the subnational and national level to come together in these forums and to share common challenges, but also to strategize about how to best address them. So thanks for sharing your experience with us, Tatat. And I'd now like to invite our third speaker, who's Leah Mitaba from our platform in Zambia, to maybe give us her reaction to the findings of the scoping study that were presented so far and how they resonate with her own experience and that of her platform in Zambia. So over to you, Leah.
All right, thank you very much, Deidre. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I think great to be part of this forum that is bringing together, I think, different players among civil society that are all convening also because of our shared interest to see a vibrant and independent civil society movement that is also contributing strategically to global development, but then also regional as well as national development processes. So I will share two studies that look at what our Zambian experience as CSOs are related to what has been shared, which is an enabling environment for civil society organizations. I think the other day, a speaker that was representing the organization of the UN did mention the need, for instance, to have Ngos 16 and 17 be a cross-cutting issue. And I couldn't agree more with them because if you look at the work that civil society are involved in, whether in service delivery or advocacy, it tends to be cross-cutting. And if those organizations are not healthy, then it means that we are undermining the role that civil society has to play to achieve Agenda 2030, for instance. So for Zambia, we're in the process of repealing and replacing an NGO Act that was enacted in 2009, and it received widespread negative reaction from civil society organizations because it tended to stifle civic space. It prescribed the area of operation, the area of work, and then also they were requiring us, for instance, to provide quarterly reports, which we knew that the government did not even have the ability to actually go through. And if they saw an advocacy-focused organization that would be bringing out maybe the gaps within the operations or governance issues such as corruption, then those organizations will be singled out and targeted. We've also had human rights defenders, for instance, and civil society activists be targeted because of failing to meet the highly prescriptive NGO law. So we, as I think about 10 civil society organizations, which included the Zambia Council for Social Development, we took the government to court. And that's what resulted in the process we're going through at the moment. And even as at last week, we were having a meeting with the PS Minister of Justice, and he was telling us that the NGO development process is actually coming from the international sphere through the FATF process, which is a Financial Action Task Force. But we also recently did a research as ZCSD that looked at the impact of the FATF on civic space. And in it, we found that from the time that that NGO law had been enacted, the FATF recommendations had actually been revised. And I think the FATF recommendations are very clear. And then also they prescribe a participatory approach to government in terms of like meeting the recommendations. But on the ground, what we have seen is a quite restrictive approach by the government where they are leaving out civil society players. For instance, Zambia had its mutual evaluation report in 2009 under a SAMLAG, which is a FATF-style regional body. And in that, I think Zambia was found wanting because the government had failed to create awareness of the FATF process. And then also the government had to an extent misinterpreted the whole issue of the FATF recommendation. So what came out then was the need for civil society organizations to actually collaborate, share knowledge. And I think in this process, we had colleagues from Uganda, we had colleagues from Nigeria or EBC sharing their experiences of how they've gone around and ensured that they have influenced governments to actually involve civil society organizations in the implementation of the FATF recommendations. So drawing from such networking opportunities, we've been able to highlight even to the government, the Financial Intelligence Center, as well as the NGO registration body, that what the NGO Act is actually prescribing is going beyond the FATF recommendations. But of course, government will also play on our ignorance as civil society organizations. So when I see the recommendations from the study, which is encouraging collaboration, joint advocacy, I think I see that as a great direction where we're going in, because some of these national laws that are being developed, I think my colleague from Indonesia was talking about the whole issue of cyber laws and regulations. All those are emanating from the regional or international perspective. And if we do not take keen interest, I think national governments are going to continue developing legislation not from a human rights-based perspective. So it's important for civil society organizations actually to collaborate and be able to share this knowledge. But in addition to the national level advocacy, we also need to advocate at regional level. We also need to advocate at international level. And I think I see that's where, for instance, the Forus family comes into play, because it would be easy, for instance, for Forus to actually convene maybe a meeting with the FATF Global Facility, whereas it might be difficult for ZCSD to convene that meeting from this end. And I think it would be important also for the FATF international body to understand how some of the countries are actually misinterpreting those recommendations that are coming from that process. So I actually like also the aspect of monitoring the legislative environment, because I think for governments in Africa, for instance, and Zambia specifically, we see the government's increasing appetite to actually use the legislative environment. And coupled with that, we also see government trying to play the divide and rule aspect, so that even when an activist is arrested or a human rights defender is arrested, they are alone, they have no solidarity. So I think opportunities such as these ones would also help us have that national solidarity, but regional as well as international solidarity that would then give confidence even to myself to be able to take upon the government, because without that solidarity, I think the government seems to be just so invincible, and I think scary to face alone. So I'd like here to see opportunities in that area. And I must also mention that at the moment as Zambia, we are just at the beginning of starting a human rights defense assessment for Zambia, just to understand the extent and also the context within which we are playing, so that we look at issues of risk. And I like the fact that the recommendations also brought up the aspect of risk, because I think at the moment we're taking it for granted, because Zambia being ranked 4th peaceful country, we don't think that maybe somebody might follow me as a civil society activist based on what I said, based on the issues that are brought out that might be seen in bad faith with the government, which is even especially more concerning as we head towards 2021 general elections as Zambia. So I think I'm happy to be part of this process and really look forward to the next steps on ensuring that civil society organizations actually operate in an enabling environment at both individual, national, regional, as well as international levels. Thank you very much. Back to you, Deidre.
Thank you, Leah. And Leah, thank you for such an informative response to the findings of the main recommendations of the report. I mean, I think what you shared with us there, the fact that the NGO Act was introduced in Zambia, really highlights the validity of this scoping study, focusing, one of its main areas of focus is on the legal and regulatory environment. And it really highlights again, and the story you told us about the activities of yourself and your other CSO networks in Zambia, that having access to good research, capacities, and also to legal expertise. And I think you mentioned the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, which is used by governments on occasion to as a justification for clamping down on civil society. So I think it's very important that in this work that we're doing on a civic space and enabling environment, that we do have the research capacities, access to legal expertise, and as you say, also the opportunity perhaps for engagement with these international bodies, so that they know and are made aware of how national governments are using those international instruments, to misinterpret and maybe to constrain civil society. So thanks to the three speakers, to Pedro, to Tatat and to Leah for sharing their reactions with us. We have an opportunity just for one or two quick comments before we then move to Arturo, who will explain to us how the breakout rooms are going to work. But I do see a question in the chat box from Justina Calicante from our Lithuanian platform. So Justina, if you would like to just speak briefly, if you wish to put the point or the question that you asked there to our speakers, please feel free to do so. Justina, if you want to unmute yourself, or if you're having difficulties with that, I can read your question aloud. Okay, so I don't see Justina coming in, but Justina has asked about the drop of funding and the closure of NGOs. She's asked, is it mainly due to a cut of national funds or international funds? And she asked also for a comment on, to comment more on environmental human rights organizations who got a lot of pressure before and during the fires of Amazon and their actions. How did they survive the second pressure of COVID? Okay, so that was a question I think that she was putting possibly more to Pedro from Abong, and I see Pedro has responded in writing. So if Justina feels that has been answered sufficiently well, I can move on then, I think, to the next stage of the session, which is where we move into working groups, to breakout groups. So I'm going to ask Arturo to come and explain to us again how these groups will work and who has been allocated to which group based on your preferences expressed. So Arturo, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Deirdre. We're going to have one breakout room since we have 7 participants who selected the Spanish breakout room. This one will be on digital transformation. I will tell you the names now of the persons who selected this channel. We have Ana de Oliveira. We have also Cristina Prego, Francisco Garcia, Pedro Boca, Asociación de ONGs de Paraguay y Sandino Solimán. Estas personas estarán en el grupo de español. En el grupo en francés, si quieren permanecer en este grupo en francés, tenemos a Oscar y tenemos a Paulina Sabola y a Sara Strack y a Sara Enon. Sorry about that. I got confused with languages. Deirdre, I'm sorry. For the French group, we have Oscar, we have Paulina Sabola, we have Sara Enon, and we have Sara Strack. So we have 4 people in the French group, and we have 5 people in the Spanish group. The rest of the participants will stay in the floor, which will be the English group, and that will be on women's rights organizations and promoting gender equality. So just to recap, Spanish will be digital transformation, French will be CSO's stigmatization, 4 participants, Spanish 5, and the rest of participants will stay on the main floor to participate in the English group, which will be on women's rights organizations and promoting gender equality. So I will create now the groups, Deirdre.
Great. And just to say very briefly that each group will have a facilitator who has been appointed already. And we will also need a rapporteur from each group to feed back the main points from the group to the larger group when you return. So the facilitator will take responsibility for organizing that at the beginning of the breakout group. So when you're ready, Arturo, we'll move into our breakout groups.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Brian Tomlinson, AidWatch Canada, and I'm the facilitator for the English group. Can everybody hear me properly? I'm assuming so, unless I see something
Yes.
to the contrary. Perhaps you could also put down your hands so that we can keep order. As Deidre said, we are focusing this session on women's rights organizations in the context of shrinking civic space and enabling environment issues. So that'll be the topic for the next 20 minutes or so. We need a rapporteur, and I was informed that Sarah Johns, if you're in the group, that you had agreed to be a rapporteur possibly. Could you confirm that with me? Sarah, are you in the room?
I don't think Sarah's in the room with us, Brian.
Okay. How about Rowan from Bond? Are you in the room? You apparently also agreed as a possibility.
No, I don't see Rowan either.
Okay, I'll put down to Glenn Farad. Are you in the room?
I don't see Glenn.
I am.
You are Glenn, sorry.
Oh, good. I assume you were aware of this, that you were approached previously and that you could be the rapporteur for this group. Is that okay?
No previous arrangement.
Oh, sorry.
But unless someone else is keen to do it, I'll step in.
Okay, it's not a difficult task, hopefully. We only want a very short report back because of time. So the idea is to report back 3 or 4, 5 key points that are made in the course of the discussion. And we're going to focus on 2 questions relating to the topic. The first question is to tell us a bit about your own experiences of working with and supporting women's rights organizations in efforts to promote more open civic space and enabling environment issues. So that's we'll focus on that for a bit. And then the second question, what could Forus do to support the work of its members in this area? So these are the 2 questions. So in the report back, I think we want perspectives on both, but particularly on the last one because of the interest of Forus in developing further program in this area. It would be helpful. So is that okay with you, Glenn?
Oh, that's fine. It's okay.
Good. Thank you very much. So without further ado, I'll just open the discussion. And we all know that women's rights organizations are at the forefront of many organizations who are facing and confronting closing civic space, overt attacks. We know from Frontline Defenders that last year 40 women's rights, human rights defenders were killed out of more than 300 human rights defenders. We know that women's rights organizations, for example, in Canada, they were the first to come under attack from our previous government and were defunded. We know that women face structural barriers, patriarchy for participation in political processes and access to decision makers. And we know that fundamentalism is gaining ground in many countries and shaping social norms, which are really affecting the promotion of gender equality and women's rights. So with that introduction, I'll just ask you to put up your hand if you wish to intervene. Could you briefly describe your own experience in this area and working with or supporting women's rights organizations in the context of shrinking civic space? Do I have any volunteers to start the conversation? If I don't see your hand, just unmute yourself and talk. No one wanting to break the ice? I mean, many of you have, I think, women's rights organizations in your membership. Have they brought forward issues such as this in the context of your own work as platforms?
I see, Brian, that Leah's in our group. Leah, I wonder, would you start? I know you have done a good bit of work with women's groups. Would you like to?
Yes, Deidre. So the Zambia Council for Social Development, we are actually in the process of increasing our work with the women's groups because we believe that by improving the participation of women in the different development processes, so opening up civic space, supporting women in decision making, we believe that doing that is going to address some of the other problems that we have. It would have a catalytic effect. So to better understand this process, for instance, we are currently in the process of doing an HRD assessment that will also bring out the different challenges that women face. So for instance, if you look at our neighboring country, which is Zimbabwe, we are having stories where, women activists are actually raped, the sexual violence against them, they're actually brutally and physically beaten up. So you'll find that the suffering of the women in a nation that is experiencing shrinking civic space is actually double-fold. It's not only just physical beyond maybe just being beaten up or emotionally abused. It includes actually sexual violence, which is, I think, one of the worst things that maybe a woman can actually go through. But then also in addition is that we are having our general elections next year. And Zambia is still way below in meeting and achieving the 50-50 women, gender representation of women in the political office. At parliamentary level, we are at 17%. At local government level, we are at 6%. And one of the reasons women are shunning politics is the same space where they're not able to speak out. They're not protected. They can't go and campaign in the night because campaigning is in the night. And then also women-focused organizations actually find it hard to support the women because the reality on the ground is that the men are actually using money, for instance, to do the politics, but then the women's groups have to restrict themselves, of course, to do the right thing, which is an issue-based kind of politics. And then also because of the dangers that they face, they cannot do some of the activities that they have to do in, for instance, very remote areas. So we see ourselves supported by the Carter Center actually going into that space where we're convening this HCSD membership to see how we can support and speak out against violence against women, and then be able to make politics, for instance, or decision-making a favorable place for women actually to participate and thrive. So I think those are some of the issues. And then also the work that we've recently done on the NGO Act and the FATF process, it also brings out the aspect of the need to actually support women-focused organizations more, because they tend to be smaller, for instance, in rural areas, and some of the legal expectations that are expected of the women are actually restrictive in nature and too much for a smaller organization in the outlying areas to actually meet. And then based on that, of course, there's a domestic dynamic at home where maybe the woman also is also restricted as to how much they can actually do and be in that space. So all that is pointing to the need for us to really make this space safe for women and girls, and then also just open up civic space so that women can actually thrive in the different works that they do, whether at community level or maybe participation in labor issues, as well as in decision making.
Well, thank you for that. And I think you, Hum Bandari put a question in the chat box, which I think you've spoken to in part, which is that women's organizations are different or can be different from other CSOs in general terms in relation to civic space. And this is brought forward, I think, and certainly in our research, as you look at the impact of the pandemic and the ways in which the pandemic has not only accentuated existing trends affecting women's rights and gender equality, but have compounded them. And I'm wondering if any of your organizations are confronting those issues and perhaps talk a bit about strategies that we might develop to confront them. Anybody wish to intervene on that or anything else you wish to talk about?
I think I could add on to that, just giving the Zambian perspective again, because Zambia went through a partial lockdown, and then there was a call for people to stay at home. And I think from that, we saw that women were actually negatively affected. There was an increase on gender-based violence within their homes. But then also we found that the domestic obligations that the women had to play in terms of caregiving, in terms of caring for the spouses that were now home, in terms of caring for the children that were home from boarding schools and also from day schools, so they are home 24 hours. You find that the pandemic impact on the women was actually way more, to the point of women not even having time to rest. And then also when you look at those that are involved in the informal sector, at the beginning of the pandemic and when it was at its peak, you know, there was a restriction on what you could buy. So those women that were selling vegetables, fruits, and then other stuff by the roadside, they could not really sell their food because everybody was in a panic state now, and then they couldn't trust maybe to just buy from the roadside. So at the moment, we're in the process again of doing some research in terms of the impact of the COVID on women in the informal sector. And I think there's one that was already done by the African Union. And then even that one brought out the negative impact, which was felt more by the women in comparison with the men.
Okay, thank you for that further contribution. Leah mentioned that, you know, that there are always issues in women having access to decision makers and to political processes for both structural and gender equality reasons. I'm wondering if other platforms have confronted that issue and have strategies in ways that they are promoting women's equality issues in their dialogue with governments. Anybody wish to talk about that?
Yeah, maybe I can add some of the experience of INFID.
Good, thank you.
So yeah, some of INFID's members are women's rights organizations, and INFID also has some projects that involve WROs. For example, the project on the decent work for women and youth, and also the current project is to promote gender equality by the advocacy of anti-sexual violence bill and the implementation of revision of marriage law, which is to increase the age limit for girls, for women to marriage. And then also there are some challenges in working with WROs, and also how to promote gender equality in general in Indonesia. So the first one I also mentioned about the growing conservatism, which is very much yeah, it's the obstacle for some of the issues, for example, on the advocacy for the anti-sexual violence bill, because this anti-sexual violence bill is considered as promoting so considered as an immoral law, for example, by promoting free sex and also abortion and so on. This is our battle since 2016 on how to, actually this law is to protect more the victims, and also how to prevent the sexual violence. But there are so many misunderstandings which is created by the conservative groups and also the conservative political parties against this law. That's why until now, after almost 4 years, we're still struggling for these issues. And the other one is for the the issues implementation of revision of marriage law. So in 2009, actually, CSOs working with some good people in the government successfully revised this marriage law, which is from the original marriage law is from 1974 and currently revised in 2019. And we are successfully increased the limit of age for women to marriage from 16 years old to 19 years old. However, the implementations is still very much challenging because there's challenges from the religious challenges and also from the cultural challenges also. So especially those two issues, which is very much how to say that very much against by the conservatives and also other parties. And then also another issues is that Lea also mentioned during the COVID-19, increasing gender-based violence and also increasing hours for women to do the care work, especially. And then the other issues, the other challenge is that lack of support from other sectors, CSOs working in other sectors. For example, when we advocate for these two laws or to promote gender equality, most of the organization working on these issues is women rights organization issues. So very limited other organizations will also speak about those issues. So this is also kind of makes the struggle is partial and fragmented. So to be said, it's also we also need to work on that kind of fragmented situation among CSOs itself, including the WROs. And then the other is that from the government side itself, actually some of them are very much supported for gender equality in general. So in some part, for example, for the participation in education or in job and so on. However, there are challenges also which are the obstacle to those issues. So maybe that's from me. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I'm conscious of time here, and I'd like to switch our conversation a bit to the second question, which is, given the challenges that we've heard and really the rich experience of some of the interventions and members in addressing some of the issues relating to women's rights organizations and civic space and access to power, et cetera, what do you think could be roles for Forus as a global partnership in this area? And just to recall that as a consultancy, we set out 4 areas of possible action: advocacy leadership at the global level, training and resources, peer learning, and fundraising. So these are areas generic, but in relation to the challenges that we've just heard around women's rights organizations, are there particular aspects that you think Forus could be enhancing in their work that would enable better and more engagement on these questions at the country level through the platforms? Anyone wish to pick up some suggestions? No?
Hi, Brian. It's Glenn, yeah?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I think one of the things that we have long identified, if we take the Southern Africa region, is that within the national coalitions and platforms, there seems to be a reluctance or a number of built-in obstacles to the emergence of women leadership. Lea, for example, is one of the few members of a national coalition who is a woman. And I think perhaps there's some space for us to begin to assist national coalitions, and this might fall under peer learning or training to begin to capacitate organizations to support the emergence of women leadership internally.
Mhm. Okay, that's a very good point. It combines the importance of advocacy leadership with the notion that women need to be at the forefront of advocating relating to gender equality and women's rights. So that's a very important point. Anybody, I heard somebody else trying to intervene there. Is I cut off?
Yeah, Leah, I was trying to suggest that there's quite a number of studies that have been done, like on the impact of COVID on women. So that's women's organizations, but then also women in the rural areas as well as those in the informal sector. Perhaps Forus could actually see and put them together and then see how maybe national platform, working through the national platforms and the women member organizations, some interventions can actually be targeted to ease the shock on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then maybe as Glenn also pointed out, just building onto that, how do we also encourage, yes, female leadership within our network platforms? So maybe there's an aspect of mentorship as well as cross-learning that ought to happen. Because, I mean, I'm, yes, a female leader of a national platform, and it's not been easy, because I'm getting into a platform that has been male dominated, starting maybe from board level as well as executive leadership. So really to challenge some of the patriarchal systems that are within the system, it's really not been an easy thing. So I think the network could do with a little bit more of mentorship and peer learning as well as encouragement.
Okay, that's very good. Other proposals, other suggestions? Do these resonate with other platforms?
Sorry?
Go ahead.
Yes,
Go ahead,
I
Tata.
want also, I want to add also my support on the female leadership in the CSOs and as well as in the national platform, because I see also the situation in Indonesia that it's very hard for, maybe women are majority, for example, in our office, but our voice is kind of not easy, even in my organization. So, and it happens also in some of other organizations, and which is very much still male dominated. And then also, if Forus, for example, can have some kind of training or a forum or study on this female leadership in CSOs or the national platform, it would be very great to see how what's the challenges and what's or the success stories and so on. It would be very good for us. And then also the second one is on the COVID-19 and gender. INFID also working on those issues, but it would be also good if we have some kind of sharing or so on this gender and COVID-19, which is the current situations, and also especially Indonesia is currently still very much deteriorating situation of COVID-19, which the number is still very much increasing and so on. So other than that, I don't know how to say it. I think I also mentioned this to Anna, but we need more forum in the local level. Yeah, Forus maybe, I'm not sure if Forus maybe can support those kind of forums. Like we can have, for example, for us to have more dialogue with more CSOs also, because from what I also explained, that they felt those kind of forums are really helpful for them to connect, to share their difficulties in everything, for funding, in advocacy, and so on. So yeah, that's maybe some of the suggestions. Thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just to build on that point, somebody has put in the chat box that we need to explore coalition building at the national level, and I think in part you're talking to that. But it's also very important to engage women's rights organizations who might not be a part of your platform in those dialogues that you're speaking to, and so women's voices are heard throughout the conversation at the national level. Other suggestions for Forus?
Brian, I think I see Justina and Akio both have their hands up, if I'm correct.
Okay, well, Justine first and then
Yes.
Akil.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, wonderful. So just, okay, first notes from Lithuania, what I'm here. We faced a lot of challenges last year because it was election year. As the previous government, the parliament was mainly, you know, all the ministers and the leadership was basically gender exclusive of the woman. But it just changed dramatically last week as we have 3 leading parties and 3 leading basically leaders of the parliament, a female. And what we did, it's during this campaign, we also noticed there was a lot of targeting on kind of abilities, right, to act. So one successful campaign, what we did, because we did elections, basically program observation and everything, and advocacy campaign was targeting specific points of the woman issue. One, you know, directly saying that women cannot be in lead. Well, that's like, you know, it was kind of outdated, but for example, what we have is specific, and what also came more in from our members, our women organizations, is a pay gap. That's what we do every year. For example, very, you know, the fact-based advocacy campaign. So Lithuanian, for example, gender pay gap. What is this and how it's counted, and you know, what's the gap, and like we have it, because normally sometimes you say that a woman is excluded in Lithuania. They say, well, yeah, but you know, you always say that. Pay gap and leadership positions, what we face, it's we would have leaders, female, I mean, from NGOs, even our platform don't have a gender equality, and parliament now, but we have, for example, official different payings. It's not official based on gender, but that's how it's counted, and it comes from universities and rectors. So we try also to, well, on side, you know, bring the success stories, but then also focus on those very specific target things. And to add little more was also what we did and what came challenge for us. It was not so much of the challenge for the women organizations during the COVID, as the organizations were not really targeted as such. We have 2 of them, then +2 on the gender in general, where we focus basically on the gender issues, not specifically women. We have some other problems, you know, where men are also facing due to some targeted, for example, professions where they discriminated. Of course, the paying violence, we had the special support line. Our women organizations had a special support line for gender-based violence, homicide. For example, the main social works, we had a full lockdown in Lithuania, but then, for example, the social care places were open, and it was specifically targeted that women stays working there. It was very controversial policy from the centers. And then maybe the recent example where I would see maybe Forus or there are also platforms coming and probably more global voice. What we faced is with our Belarusian colleagues, as now we also work basically with integration and hosting the asylum seekers and supporting the civil society during all what happened in Belarus. That in the first round, when the first protest started and it was more men, they were targeted differently. Well, you know, it's like, this is conspiracy and this is whatever, something political. But when the woman came and you see the specific women marches, we have a lot of violent cases, open violence, as kind of, they probably cannot target it as a, I don't know, any political issues, because, you know, you have the woman coming with the kids to the peaceful protest march. Like we host and also we direct as a platform work for the asylum for a lot of women now. So it's also, I mean, women in peace, right? Women in peace building. And it came so much, I mean, we saw these differences, and even from our colleagues here, if you understand what I mean, that kind of this direct violence came as a direct response because they couldn't use any other explanation that women could be lying there, or something. So that was something new what came for us recently. And we are thinking to launch basically those stories on some women peace campaigns to support, or also build a network basically of, I don't know, women as peacemakers, for inside support, how, some kind of thing. I don't have the final idea yet, but that's a kind of also new need for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Two more speakers, so I'm just conscious of time. Thank you for those observations and suggestions from Lithuania. Akio, can you make a brief intervention, and then Emelina after Akio?
Okay, this is Akio from Japan, Janik, and I think one of the issues that was raised during the discussion today was how we fight with conservatism and also fundamentalism. But I think many of you know that last week there was a very dangerous document signed by 32 countries. The leadership was taken by US under Trump, and also Indonesia was one of the countries that took leadership. Other countries includes Hungary and Egypt, and also a few others. But what's called the Geneva Consensus Declarations, it's really anti-abortion and anti-LGBTQ rights document. So this kind of document could work against women's rights issues and all the other issues. So I think we should fight. We should really fight against this kind of international coalition building among countries with conservative, maybe leaders with conservative values. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Emelina?
Thank you. Just a quick comment to emphasize my point in terms of coalition building. And this comes from the perspective of work that we have been doing in women political empowerment in our Pacific regions, which we still have very low representations of women in the political leadership. But one of the things that has come out strongly with many national snapshots, positioning of where we are in terms of, voting for women in political arena, that we find that men do vote for women, and women are the ones that are a bit, kind of not really sure whether they believe in themselves and believe in the women's leadership. And so that we cannot, well, we ask the question is that why is it that we continue to talk about women leadership, women, equality, gender equality and all of that for years, and we still haven't seen much moved forward. We still see the same struggle. We still see, things that has been talked about in the past 20, 30, or even 50 years ago. And I think we really need to look into the power dynamics. And some of the reality in our countries is that when you really push for women to be in the leadership positions, you have to create the enabling environment to support them, because it's a really risky situation, and we often find that when women are in a leadership position, they're not just there to do for themselves to showcase that they are capable or their competency, but they're in that position to really demonstrate to the rest of that country that women can really do a better job than others in the position. So coalition building can help bring people from all different sectors, not just women-led organizations, but others who may, believe in the cause, but not so much from a feminist kind of strong position, but people that may believe that there is, a time for for women to take a much more leading role, because our men counterpart had messed up our countries for years, and maybe this is the time for women to take those. But then we need to support those.
Sorry, Emmeline, I have to intervene because I've been told that I need to end the workshop, but that's a good point to end on, given the topic. So thank you very much, and thanks everybody for their interventions. And hopefully, Glenn, you can sum up a few points in the next session of the report back. So I assume that we're moving back into the plenary.
Great, thank
right?
you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. Yeah, you know, we stayed in the main room, the English-speaking group, so we didn't notice when others had returned and joined us. But as far as I'm aware, and Arturo, can you just confirm this, that the Spanish and the French speakers have now joined us also?
Yes, Deirdre.
That's great. So we're back in the main plenary again, and in each group a rapporteur was identified who was going to feed back the key points from that breakout group to the main forum here. So the first group I'll ask to provide the feedback is the French-speaking group. So would the rapporteur from the French-speaking group please share some of the key points that emerged from your discussions with us? So who is the rapporteur for the French-speaking group?
So Deirdre, this is Sarah speaking. So we ended up with very, very few people in the French-speaking group, and thus we have decided at the very beginning, it was actually only one person, one member speaking French, and another one listening in. And so we've decided at the very beginning of the working group to join back in the English-speaking group, and the interpreters were kind enough to provide French interpretation during that group. So there isn't really a report back on that topic. However, it might be interesting to hear some reflections on the topic of the stigmatization of the CSOs and the positive narrative that we need to develop for CSOs. If we don't have time in this session, we will definitely include that, and that was already planned in the closing session of the forum. So I hope that everyone will be able to join that session that starts in about an hour.
That's great, Sarah. Thanks for that. So maybe I'll go over then to the Spanish-speaking group and ask the rapporteur of the Spanish-speaking group to provide us with some feedback on the main points emerging from your discussions. So who is the rapporteur for the Spanish-speaking group? Can you let us know, Anna?
Yes, sure. No, it was our colleague from Paraguay.
Great. So could our colleague from Paraguay please share with us the main findings? Or the main...
Sí. Raúl de Monte de Paraguay. Bueno, en el grupo de la transformación digital se han encarado aspectos positivos y aspectos negativos. Entre los aspectos negativos podemos citar la brecha digital que ha surgido entre diferentes personas dirigentes de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil. El primer factor es el factor de la clase social, aquellos que han tenido mayor poder adquisitivo y pudieron disponer de mejores instrumentos como computadoras, señal de internet, etcétera, han tenido mayor aprovechamiento, mientras que aquellos que de recursos más limitados han tenido mucha dificultad inclusive de acceso a la señal de internet. Y me estoy refiriendo también al sector rural, donde la comunicación es más difícil y hay lugares en que no llega la señal. También podemos decir el incremento en el aceleramiento en los trabajos debido a que el factor digital ha ayudado a que tengamos mucho más reuniones y mayor contacto. Eso ha generado también un mayor estrés en la capacidad de respuesta. Entre los factores positivos podemos citar a la gran circulación de información como nunca antes ha vivido el país y el mundo, en el sentido de tener acceso a todo tipo de información, como el caso de este Forus, ¿verdad? Es también la mayor participación en las redes sociales que ha servido no solamente para informar y dar a conocer las propuestas, sino también como canal de denuncia por las injusticias que se cometen en la estigmatización de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, principalmente por parte de los políticos tradicionales que buscan culpar la incapacidad de su gestión a las ONGs. Entonces, lo que no podemos publicar o las noticias que nos podemos leer en los medios comerciales, televisión, radio, etcétera, sí por las redes sociales han sido un gran canal para divulgar esta información y acelerar también los procesos de comunicación. En ese sentido, anotamos dos factores importantes que hemos tenido con el proyecto de Forus, que dicho sea de paso ha terminado en el mes de septiembre. Entonces, en el balance que estamos haciendo, primero es que Forus nos ha ayudado mucho a mejorar la política comunicacional, porque ante los ataques que reciben las ONGs acá en el país por parte de los políticos y de los grupos económicos, la gente se pregunta qué hacen las ONGs, para qué sirven. Entonces, en este boletín nosotros hemos desarrollado una recopilación sobre qué hacen las ONG en el Paraguay y cuál es su contribución al fortalecimiento de la democracia y al desarrollo sustentable del país, ¿verdad? Entonces, eso ha sido un elemento muy importante. Y lo segundo, que hemos también mejorado en la información y la capacitación gracias a los espacios que Foro ha desarrollado, como así también otros espacios como la Mesa de Articulación de Plataformas Nacionales de América Latina, en el sentido de intercambiar información y aprender lecciones sobre cómo otras plataformas de otros países han encarado diferentes tipos de problemas, como por ejemplo la reducción de los espacios cívicos, el tema del acceso a financiamiento, el control policial que se ha incrementado aprovechando la pandemia y el aislamiento social que vive la población, ¿verdad? Entonces, esta circulación de información ha sido muy importante y nosotros le alentamos a que Forus pueda seguir profundizando en esta tarea de conectar y de relacionar a organizaciones de la sociedad civil de diferentes países. Lo mismo con el caso de Brasil y del compañero de Honduras, que los problemas son bastante similares. La compañera de Brasil ha señalado los grandes problemas que tienen en la Amazonía y la reducción de los espacios cívicos que están atravesando con el actual presidente, que ha significado una reducción en materia de derechos y de prácticas en el Brasil. Y ella lo resumió diciendo, con este presidente estamos camino al infierno, ¿verdad? Para dar una figura. Bueno, yo termino por ahí por razones de tiempo y si hay pregunta, a disposición.
Great, thank you very much for the clear recommendations, particularly for Forus, that came out of that discussion, and thank you for feeding them back to us. I'd like to move now to the English-speaking group, and that was the group that Brian facilitated, and I think it was Glenn who agreed to provide a short synopsis of the main points arising. So over to you, Glenn.
Thanks, Deirdre. I hope you can hear me. So in our group, we had two questions that we looked at. One was firstly the experience in supporting increasing civic space and women's rights organizations, and secondly, quite specifically, what Forus could help in developing further programming in this area. So we had a number of contributions from participants, both on the chat and in the discussion, from Zambia, Indonesia, Lithuania, Japan, and so on. And some of the key points that were noted was the low level of women's participation in political processes, the negative impacts on women resulting from COVID-19 and the lockdown, the increased and organized increase in conservatism more generally in the globe. And I think we were helpfully pointed to the emergence of a group of countries known as the Geneva Consensus who are consolidating a anti-women agenda, but also participants noted the increase in organized violence against women in a number of countries when it came to political protest movements. And we had some very specific examples of that. On the other side, we were also able to celebrate certain victories, particularly with regards to Indonesia, with the marriage age law. The age of marriage in law has been moved from 16 to 19, yet still facing the problems of implementation arising from social conservatism and some political forces. We also heard about new organizing strategies and responses to the lockdown and the impacts of women. So I think that the first, when we then moved on to, we were reminded of the 4 key areas of Forus's new thinking coming from the research. But I think the first consensus that we emerged from our discussion was to pull together the number of studies on the impact of COVID-19 on women and the advocacy positions that were emerging from the different regions and coalitions so that they could be sharing across platforms. Secondly, also for us to begin to, as for us, look at supporting the emergence of women's leadership in the national coalitions, for there to be mentorship and cross-learning of women leadership from board levels through to executive management levels, and as well as creating specific capacities for coalition building of women's rights organizations and to support local gender forums which engage on women's rights issues and to create dialogue and to begin to understand better how to do that. And I think lastly, it was on the advocacy was to continue to work for the promotion, for us to work for the promotion of women's rights at different levels, particularly at the international sphere. I hope that's an accurate summary.
Glenn, thank you. Having been in that group myself, you did an excellent summary, I think, of the points that were raised and the recommendations made. So thanks very much. We are running out of time now, so I'd like to ask Shannon Kindernay, who's one of the consultants who carried out the scoping study, to address briefly just the issue of how Forus might best use the recommendations from the scoping study to move forward with its work on enabling environment. So Shannon, over to you.
Great. Thanks everybody for your contributions today and for your contributions throughout the research process. It's been very helpful to have such high interest and participation. So in terms of the sort of the next steps in the research process and how Forus can make use of some of the key recommendations that we have, I'll just share that we are preparing and finalizing the external report. And so part of our goal today with the discussion groups that we had was to get a bit double down on some of the key topics that we were hoping to get a bit more information to go into that final report and to get a few more specific recommendations in those areas. So very thankful to you all for your inputs. That'll help us to kind of flesh out the areas that we had in those discussion groups and some very specific examples around what Forus can do in terms of CSO stigmatization, digital transformation, and women's rights organizations and so on. So we will do that in the next version, and we will, of course, then take the inputs that you gave to us in terms of additional challenges you see and so on to finalize the report. In the report, as Anna presented, we do put forward a series of areas that we see Forus being able to play a role in terms of an action plan. And so in what we presented to you today, I'm sure you can tell that this is summary, but there's a lot more, much more detailed information that many of you provided to us around very specific areas of support that you would like for us to consider. And so what we will be preparing in addition to this external report that will be shared widely is a more internal report for Forus that will really try to help set out some of our learnings from this research process around what those 4 pillars around advocacy, resources, peer learning, and fundraising, what those might look like, what some of the low-hanging fruit might be for Forus, things that they can very quickly move forward with in terms of supporting the membership, as well as pieces that we think will require longer-term investment, further engagement with Forus members. Some of that might be in the research space, for example, this point around kind of consolidating where we're at with respect to women's rights organizations, gender equality, and the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic. So there are some pieces that will certainly be, longer term. And from there, our hope is that with this, information in hand, Forus will be able to work with its members to develop a sort of an action plan and strategy going forward around civic space in the enabling environment. So I don't want to say too much more than that, Deidre, because I don't want to commit. It's not my place to commit you to what we're suggesting you should do. But certainly we'll be looking forward to seeing how our recommendations roll out in the future. And since we are short on time, Deidre, maybe I will stop there and let you and your team have the final word around what your next steps will be. Just to say that we are hoping to finalize this report on our side, at least in the coming weeks. But of course, as you all know, information will be translated and provided to members. So the timelines on the kind of final release, I suppose, will be best articulated by our colleagues at Forus.
Great. Thanks very much, Shannon, for that. And yes, just to say, first of all, that we'd like to thank again yourselves, the consultants, and our members who participated so actively in this study. I think any of the recommendations coming out of it are going to be very much grounded in their experience of the challenges they face in their different national and regional contexts. And we hope to do justice to the report and to all the work that went into it by developing a very clear enabling environment strategy for the network. We are a global network, so obviously putting together that strategy will take some time. We want to do it in full cooperation and collaboration with our members. So we will be setting up a working group also on enabling environment within Forus to harness the expertise and the experience and the energy and enthusiasm of our members. So that's something that will be happening over the coming months. But we look forward to getting as we said, the first draft of the report from you, and we will be sharing that with members certainly by December. We know there probably will be some changes and some reviewing to do of the first draft, but we expect to be able to share it externally and with our members by the end of the year. So we are also translating the report, or at least the key parts of the report will be done as an initial translation, and those should also be available by the end of the year. So on that note, and rather than extending the call beyond the time we've allowed, I'd like to wrap up by saying thank you to you all for participating and for the good discussion we had in our breakout groups, as well as in the main discussion for all of those who contributed, including our platforms from Zambia, Brazil, and Indonesia, who provided specific input. And I would like to also thank our professional simultaneous interpreters who did a great job during this session. And they are Guillaume Blanc, Elizabeth Baca, Isa Santoyo, and Paula Jimenez, all based in Mexico City. And thank you for the excellent job you did today. I'd like to encourage all of you also to consider joining the next session, which will be closely related in some of its themes to this. It begins in 30 minutes' time. It's the closing panel of the Forus virtual forum, and it's called A Positive Agenda for Civil Society. So hopefully see you all there. But before we finish this call, I'm going to hand back to Arturo, who's just going to put a short survey question to you again. So thanks very much, everybody, for your participation today. And if you have time before you leave the call, you might just complete the survey question. Agree or disagree with it.
Yes, thank you very much, Deirdre. We have a last survey. We would like to know if you agree or if you disagree with the following statement. I'm so sorry, but the first option should be I agree, and the second one should be I disagree. So the statement is the following: Forus should develop a global strategy on enabling environment based on the recommendations of the Scoping Study on enabling environment it recently commissioned. Please remember the first one should be I agree, and the second one I disagree.
Arturo, it looks like both 1 and 2, I disagree.
Yes, I'm so sorry about that. It was a small mistake, but the first one should be I agree. So if you click on the first one, that means that you agree. And if you click on the second one, it means you disagree. So sorry about that. We're still waiting for some people to answer.
And finally, just while we're waiting, to thank again the consultants who did such a great job of the scoping study, and also for their involvement in this session to really explore a little more deeply some of the issues that they want to include in the report. So thanks to Shannon, to Anna, and to Brian. So let me know, Arturo, when we have the survey completed. And I think we're just on time. In fact, we may be a minute or two before we plan to finish. So I think we've done extremely well in terms of time.
I think we can say that all of us agree, 92% agree, and maybe we have one disagree, but it's just because we had a problem with the survey. Both answers were I disagree. So we can say that everyone agrees.
So I think we have the thumbs up to Forus creating an enabling environment strategy based on the key recommendations of the report. That's great news and a good message on which to end this session. So thank you everybody for participating, and hopefully see you in 30 minutes at the next and final session of the virtual forum. Thanks everybody, thanks interpreters, and thanks to all the staff who also made this call and this session possible. Thanks everybody, bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you.